People who are still interested to listen to the talks may please walk in and cut short their break so that we can have sound and smooth scientific session without much of cutting short of the timelines which each speaker is entitled to. The first topic would be taken up by me, and that's going to be on effective regulatory information management. The regulatory affairs professional, as you are aware, has to be knowledgeable about multiple areas of drug development, right from preclinical or even from the molecular development, from the R&D stage to the preclinical stage when it goes into the animal studies, whether it's pharmacological studies or toxicological studies, or from there on once it goes into clinical development from the phase 1, phase 2 or phase 3, and then over into the different markets. In each of these regions, when you are filing for approvals, whether it's a preclinical stage or it's a clinical stage or it's post-commercialization stage, each of these stages there's a host of information which comes to the regulatory group, and that information has to be disseminated in a proper manner, in a very structured manner, so that you get least number of queries, maximum compliances for your filings, and then speedy approval. So that's the whole crux of how the regulatory affairs group should function. And here I have tried to list down some of the regulatory agencies, some of the regulatory filings, which one needs to do over a course of the entire drug development. So getting the information for a regulatory affairs department or a professional within a company, there are different sources. If you could broadly split it, it would be falling within the internal sources or the external sources. So within internal, you may have dependencies on medical affairs, which is going to give you a whole lot of documents from protocol to writing those, or from market feedbacks, or data management and biostatistics, which is involved in generating the data, from collating the data in terms of preparing the reports, analyzing the data, statistical interpretation of the data, or the research and development group, which is actually working on the research aspects and then coming up with a molecule, the characterization of that, the process development, which has taken it up for scale-up and then further characterization, or the analytical department, which is involved in preparing your specification, the results, the validations for those, or your QC, internal QC, your internal QA, the production department, which is into formulation, development, and the actual formulation, or the marketing department, the clinical research group, if you have any, which does all the clinical trials, the preclinical group, which does the non-clinical studies, the information technology group, the IT group within your company, the IPR group, which is a legal group, or for that matter, the business development or the marketing group. So as you see, there is a host of groups which are some way or the other linked to the regulatory group, and regulatory group has to manage to get this data in the right time and put it across in the right frame to the external world. And with the external world, there are again different linkages for the regulatory affairs group, starting with the regulators, because that is your primary interface. You have to interact with the regulators to get the job done. You have certain statutory agencies also, which are not regulatory agencies per se. Like for example, in India, you have Department of Biotechnology, Review Committee for Genetic Manipulation, Genetic Engineering Approval Committee, ICMR. So these are not regulatory agencies per se, but they are statutory agencies. There are different industry forums from where you will get information. One of these forums from the OMICS group for that matter, or OPPI for that matter, IDMA for that matter, DIA for that matter. So these agencies give you a host of information which you can collect. Your customers who are going to be actually getting your product for sale in different regions, if you have distributors who may be the intermediaries who will be actually taking your product and then giving it to your customers. So those could be another group with whom you may be interacting with. The service providers, you may be having different vendors for doing part of your activities, whether it's whatever you're outsourcing, maybe preclinical data or pharmacovigilance data, or even say something like translations of consent forms. Each of these are service providers. You have to interact with them. The media. We had people from media here, so media would also be equally vigilant, and you would have to probably get some information from them which you could probably utilize in your course of time. And you have now a recent class of people who have come up the RTI activists who would be trying to get information from different companies, and as a regulatory group you would be having the entire information at your disposal if it is pertaining to RTI query, and you have to respond to those. So with all these, RA department is no way different from being called a powerhouse of information. But to be a powerhouse and to effectively work towards it, you need to have a right kind of leadership, and with this leadership you need to have the right kind of team, and this team is something which is not individual dependent, and teams, as you would know, outperform individuals. So as a team, as a leader, you have to ensure that your team takes you through the turbulences and then able to give the right kind of deliverables for the organization. And it's a shared responsibility. It's not that one person is responsible, others cannot perform. It's a shared responsibility, and everybody has to take ownership for that. There are certain skill sets which are required in each type of activity which within the regulatory group people are doing. People who are handling, say, developed markets would have a different skill sets. People who are handling, say, emerging markets would have a different skill sets. People who are handling the local market for DCGI would have a different skill sets. People who are managing the vendors may have a different skill sets. So these skill sets have to be managed, and as a leader or as a group head, you have to ensure that the right kind of people are there for the right kind of job. Only then you will be able to perform. And above all, you should need to have a very good regulatory strategy to ensure that your deliverables as far as the organization are concerned are met with. You can also get a lot of information from the regulatory agencies which you're dealing with, right? So these agencies could be starting with the FDA, from EMA to a host of others. We spoke about Coffee Press, you have NVISA, a host of them. But how do you get information from these agencies? You have sometimes draft guidances which are issued by these agencies. So this is one opportunity for you to comment on those guidances and then come to know what those agencies expect, and those feedbacks can be given to them. Or you could become members of regulatory associations which would have a direct interface with the agencies. Or for that matter, you could ask scientific advice from them, and which would be beneficial for you when you're going for filings in these countries. More importantly, if you're facing inspections from these agencies, that will be a good opportunity for you to know what they expect and how you have to approach them when the inspections are done. So objective from this interactions are, you need to have your strategy cleared out, and that will come up only if you would be interacting with them and of course with experience. Finally, the objective is to harmonize the development program of your product through the entire value chain and make an entry into that regulatory market. So during inspections or audits, what are the kind of information you look for and what is the information you get? It all depends how you interact and how you face yourself for these audits or inspections. So before the inspections, you have to ensure that whatever records would be required for, you have to organize them and identify them in the right kind of picture. If during inspections you're not able to produce documents, say within 5 minutes or 10 minutes of being asked, then people do get suspicious that probably you're trying to nurture them, probably you're trying to doctor them, or probably you're trying to create them. So you have to be ensuring that you have the right kind of procedures, you have the right kind of SOPs in place with which you are able to designate jobs. People know what they have to do, people know how it has to be presented, people know how they have to function, and the roles have to be clearly defined. It should be told who is the one who is going to be the interface with the regulators. You need to have mock drills which you should conduct, because before any inspection happens, it's very essential for the organization to have these dummy runs done, because then you have a feel of how the inspection goes, unless and until you have done several of inspections with a particular agency. It can differ from agency to agency. The expectations of the inspection team who come, you have to probably try to gauge them what kind of inspections they have done, what's the kind of track record, what are the things they actually ask for, and then tune your team accordingly so that they've geared up and they're able to face inspections well. And always remember, you may have been a powerhouse of information, but always present the information to the point and only to the point which is asked for. Never try to give additional explanation to them and try to emphasize upon the fact that you know so many things. In the process, what may happen is you may spill out certain beans which are actually not required to be shared at that point in time. The compliance reports, after the inspections are done, you have to ensure, the regulatory team has to ensure that these compliances which would require different groups to come together and put together, and these compliance reports are sent on time, and adherence to that. More importantly, as a regulatory team, you have to ensure that whatever lessons you have learned from the previous inspection or this inspection are shared with the teams, the cross-functionally, and those errors are not repeated during your next inspection. Safety management is another group from which you can actually get a lot of information, and that information has to be shared across. You have heard of a lot of serious adverse events being reported, whether it's during clinical trials or during the marketing of the product. So these events will ultimately contribute to the database which you're generating, and the safety profile of the drug will have to be dwelled upon, to have to be refined further as and when you get more and more SUSAs or reporting of these events, which may be attributed to a drug or may not be attributed to a drug. So those causal relationship has to be identified. And during the course of the drug being marketed, you may come up with several quality issues, and these quality issues could be related to market-related complaints, mislabeling of a drug. Somebody may be selling your drug under a different brand name or with their own label, counterfeit drugs. So each of these things have to be reported. And who does the reporting? It's the regulatory group. So the ownership is with the regulatory group to keep everybody vigilant, because your sales force has to report it to you, or the marketing team which is there has to report it to you, the pharmacovigilance team has to report it to you, and you have to ensure that you report this information in the right way, in the right time, which is required as per as regulatory authorities. If you have a serious adverse event which is death, you have a certain time frame. If you have which is not related to outcome being death, then it's a different time frame. Each country may have a different time frame for reporting. So you have to comply with each of these and then go about with this information management. Ultimately, it's about the risk-benefit analysis for your drug, which has to be weighed and then presented across. To get this information, one thing which helps is networking. And one of the forums for networking is this, wherein you have different industry meets which are held, and you get to know people, and through the people, very subtly, you can get to know what information you need for your company to come out with whatever struggles or hardships you are facing. It could be related to product development, it related to characterization, it could be related to the clinical trials, it could be related to the drugs which are in the market. So these industry forums are very, very helpful. Other things are conferences, which are also very useful place to get information. You may have your sales force who may tell you, okay, this particular drug which is being marketed by X company is already being reported to have, say, certain events, and that could sensitize your sales team, and these should then trigger down to your marketing team and your product development team to see that are you going to also face similar issues, and then try to counter those. Your colleagues, who could be your counterparts in different companies, can be a source of information. Another useful thing which I have found it very useful, at least in our companies, we try to hold these journal clubs, and these journal clubs would be related to certain specific guidelines, specific regulations which would have come in different regions, and we share this information across the different groups within the company. And therein we get the views, and these views are then shared with the entire team and then structured in such a manner that everybody benefits from this. So this is another area from where you can actually get information. All that information which you collect has to be put in the right frame and then disseminated. So you cannot just keep getting information and then dump it, right? So you have to structure it, you have to manage that, and then present it in the right manner, archive it in the right manner. So for which you need effective interaction within the groups. It cannot be that the groups are at loggerheads and then you will obviously not get information from them. So you have to be in such a way that you are conditional enough and those people are receptive enough to give information to whenever you request for, or even spontaneously for that matter. You need to develop these checklists, and I find it very, very useful to have checklists for each of the activities. SOPs is one thing, checklist is another. Because when you have checklists, you know this is what the SOP says. But when you have a checklist, if you get a document which has to be prepared and you have these checklists, if you need A to Z, then you have to ensure that A to Z documents are there. If not, then you can flag it off and say there's a known deficiency which we have in our filing, and then it can be either submitted later depending upon what the management decides, or it will be held up till such time that known deficiency is cleared before you go ahead with the filing. So these checklists are a useful source of putting things together. Invariably, as you discussed earlier, we are dealing with multiple groups, and you won't get information from each of these groups in the right time. So you have to continuously follow up with these groups to ensure that you get the information. Sometimes they give information which is partly done, and again you have to review that information and see that what they've given is correct. Don't just blindly take it from them and say, okay, my job is done, my checklist is done. Checklist is not just seeing whether A, B, C, D is there. You have to see whether A, whether it's written is correct, B, what is written is correctly required as per what the regulatory requirement, and as per whatever your SOP says. So these review is equally important, not just preparing the checklist. Same way, information is required when you're registering your products in different geographies. As a company, startup company, you may start registering your product maybe to start with the local market, which will be India. Gradually, you'll expand to the different regions. For example, we are registering our product in 45 to 50 different countries right now. So I have to know, or rather my team has to know, what are the regulatory requirements in each of these regions, who are the kind of people who will give us this information, when do we need to actually file that information to them, in what format we need to file to them. So the managing of this information is also a very difficult art in itself. The filing requirements differ in each region. It's not that you're filing in Mexico, the region is the same as that what you're filing in, say, Mugambia. So things will change over a period of time. In different regions, the guidelines keep changing. As Hasumati was mentioning about Brazil and Mexico, so the regions will have their own guidelines which change over a period of time. The dossier structure would be different. Some may need ACTD structure, some would need CTD structure, some would need ECTD filing. So things would differ depending upon the country's requirements. Some require country-specific requirements. The queries would differ from country to country. You may expect that now you have filed it, you won't get any queries, yours was a complete filing for itself, but you may end up with multiple queries which you may not even have anticipated for. And these queries have to be managed in a very structured manner. You have to get this information, share that, and tomorrow when you file another product in that same country, you should be anticipating that this is the type of query. So you should be having that query addressed right in the first dossier itself, so that you don't lose time in answering these queries and then waiting for their comments. Inspections. Some countries have requirement of inspections be done, pre-inspections before they grant you registrations. So each of these inspections have to be looked at, what's the timing, and critically you have to ensure it's just a very, I would say, a project managed schedule of filing. It's not just you randomly think you will file in this country and then forget about it. You have to plan, it's a critical way, which is a critical path, and accordingly you go about doing the filing in different regions. So which market will give you best returns, so you have to go according to that. And reporting requirements. Each country may have different requirements. You have to know whether periodic safety updates have been given, what time frame it has to be given, whether it's 6 monthly, yearly, and what's a SUSA reporting, different kinds of reportings, annual reports, amendments, post-approval changes. So each of these things, information is something which is very, very critical, and managing this information is really very challenging. So the key drivers for this is that, as I mentioned, you have to structurally balance yourself. You have to ensure that whatever you're doing is in the right time, and you have to look for different markets. So if it is, what's the competition in those markets, what is the market size. You may have the best product, but if there's no market in that, there's no point in going into that region. If the demography of the patient population says more aged population, and what your drug is for a pediatric population, and you don't have that kind of market, no point in going for that market at that point in time. The regulatory factors which are there, is the country going through a crisis as far as regulations are concerned, the intellectual property, the IPR issues with respect to your drug, is it there in that country, is it infringing some patents? You have to do all those searches before you go in. The portfolio, the basket which you want to go with in that country, is it sufficient, or you have to wait before you move further? The economic growth of that country. So each of these factors make a difference before you enter into different regions, and this information is very critical, for which as a regulatory group you have to manage. I'm not sure whether all of you do that, but then it really helps if you have this kind of information. So one group which can actually help you to structure this is IT, Information Technology Group within your company. You would have all heard of electronic submissions, and these electronic submissions are a gateway for filing different dossiers. You have document management systems which can be used, DMS as we call. There are different companies which give this DMS systems solutions, wherein you have a structured way of writing the document, structured template, structured way of repository, and structured way of retrieving those documents and then putting it across. Not just having a system, you have to ensure that the system is going to be adaptable to your needs, it is scalable to the needs which you are looking in future. You may have a system now, 5 years down the line, the system requirements will be totally different. So you have to anticipate what is going to be coming in the next 5 years and plan your systems accordingly. So the systems which you develop should be structured in such a way. Change controls, many times you come up with different changes, the changes in specifications, changes in raw material, the key material which is being used. So each of these change controls may have an impact on your ultimate finished product or your API which you're going to sell. So these have to be also managed, and for which again IT can provide different solutions for that. Data mining, that's one more area, because in this world information is available in plenty. You go into the Google, you'll get a lot of information, but Google is not the only source, right? You have different ways of getting information. If you have a report to be requested for pharmacovigilance, for that matter, there are structured repositories, databases from where you can pull this information, and data mining is one way of doing it. And integrating all this data into the right kind of way in which you have to finally present this is equally important. Finally, it all helps in managing the life cycle of a product. Because if IT can do it, that's what it's actually contributing towards in managing the life cycle of your entire product. I've just given you one screenshot of a document portal. For example, you have a repository wherein you can store different documents, wherein now here I have shown you, for example, the product, which is so for example, we have repositories for different groups. If it's regulatory affairs, we have pharma, we have clinical research, we have biopharma, we have stem cells. So this is for clinical research. What are the type of licenses we are looking at? Which is the drug which is under question? Which is the product brand name? Which is for domestic filing, export filing? Which countries are we looking at? Which is the document number? It may be a license or a permission. Which is the issuing authority for that? Who is the business owner for that? From when did we get the license, when it's expiring? Now, we get these alerts from from the software that when this license is expiring. It should not happen. There's the last thing to happen, that you have a license, you are done with the validity, and then tomorrow you realize that you cannot import the drug. So then you're doomed. And then you have to upload those documents. There's a custodian for that, in which area of the entire repository is actually lying down. So these helps in actually structured way of requesting for document, ensuring that the document is obtained. You see the documents, you don't have, say, print access, you're able to view it, and then you get a physical document in case you have to renew the application. There are different screens. I'm not going into those because of paucity of time. So information management in regulatory affairs is really depending upon how well you plan your submissions, how well you are able to structure the entire task. So switch techniques is you switch. You have the entire task broken down into, say, 5 or 6 different elements, and then start designating those, start scheduling them, what's the priority status of these, and then have the different groups which are responsible for doing those activities, have those meetings with them. They should not be at loggerheads with you or with them, and then have these interfaces with them. No, don't just write mails and then forget about it. You have to have these meetings, physical meetings, because in meetings things come out much differently from probably what you would have written an email or what they would have written. And finally, you can always document it on email. This is what was told, this is what we'll get, and this is the deficiencies around that. The data flow has to be ensured that from this group it will go to this group, from finally QA and then to RA before we go ahead with the filings. So delegation is also one important thing. You cannot do everything yourself, right? You have to depend upon other groups, other teams to take this task and then provide it into you in the right kind of manner. The project reporting is also very important, not just the planning. The reporting depends upon, you have to update your stakeholders. Stakeholders would be external, it could be internal, and you have to update them what is happening with your project. And not only that, you have to analyze what the trends are. If it is going to be a downturn for you, you have to really flag this off and take corrective measures so that we are not there at the end without anything left in your hand. So the key success factors for all this is you need to have a sound IT system. Not only that, you have to ensure that there is compliance to whatever is there, because unless you have compliance, you need to be in such a littered manner that you will not know where things are in place. More importantly, keep pace with industry, regulations, and the scientific developments which are happening in your own respective areas. Integrate with the corporate and the marketing strategy. You may feel this is the best thing to do, this is the ideal thing to do as a regulatory professional, but the corporate group or the senior management or the marketing feels, no, this is how we have to come up with the final submission, or not submission, final product in that market. So you have to integrate, you have to align your thoughts with them and come up with the best possible approach so that the company is gaining in the long run. This is the last slide. I thought there's too much of information being shared as of yesterday and today. I thought I'll just share with you a light video, and I'm sure you would like it, which is more about how information comes up in this entire world and what data is.
There are things in this world that we'd rather not think about. But for some people, that's not even an option. Meet little Billy. Billy wasn't always like this. He used to be sharp, witty, like you and me. But then something happened. Billy joined the workforce. And he's not alone. As we speak, business people everywhere are battling a mysterious psychoneurological condition. One that can only be described as disturbing. Donna was Employee of the Month just last month. It now seems so long ago.
6 months after Sarah got her job, she started taking her smartphone into the bathroom with her. 6 months after that, she forgot where the bathroom was. They all suffer from iOS, Information Overload Syndrome. iOS affects millions of people across the country. A normal human brain can retain enormous amounts of information. But a business person's brain is attacked by 281 exabytes of quote-unquote pertinent information every year.
Exabytes?
That's 18 zeros worth of emails, attachments, presentations, voicemails, thought starters, FYIs, and caveats. And it's growing 30% a year. To make room for this new information, the brain is forced to delete all the old data it spent a lifetime compiling. So the very information meant to inform us is actually making us stupid. First, everyday sights and sounds begin to feel unfamiliar. Then muscle memory is affected.
Hey, Ed, how are you? Oh, I'm sorry.
Finally, survival skills disappear. iOS is highly contagious. In a matter of days, entire companies can fall victim. Be forewarned, the following image may be unsettling.
Hey, Tom, come here.
You may be asking yourself, what can I do to help little Billy live a happier, more mentally balanced life? The answer is nothing. Billy is 5 years away from being vested in his retirement plan. He's not going anywhere. He'll be dumb as a box of rocks before you know it. But you can save yourself. Won't you please help yourself? Go to helpios.com and make this a better world for yourself.
So that was all I had. Thank you. Let me know if you have any questions. Yes, please. Take the mic.
Yeah, that was a very good video. Hopefully we should find some the iOS. My question was how you guys tackle with the different regulation bodies in different countries, people different respond. So what is the best idea to go about? Either through the just emails or to the websites or just call them and all. How you guys tackle with that one?
See, first of all, deciding whether you want to go alone, whether you want to go with distributors, or you are going to go with some partners. So once you decide that, say for example, if you want to go alone, which is the highest risk in terms of taking upfront, unless and until you know the region, you have experienced that filing in that country, it's better to go with a distributor. So distributor would always be knowing this is the requirements there. You would know these are the local nitty-gritties which need to be ensured before you can get marketing approval. So once you have that sense, if it's going to the distributor, don't just depend upon the guidelines, because most of the countries, whatever guidelines you may find on the net will not be in the local language which you will be able to understand. Your distributor may be able to give you a translated version of those documents, but ultimately it is going to be your distributor or your partner in that country who is going to give you the core information which you actually require. And they'll be able to interface with those regulators much better than you sitting over here in India. Unless and until you have presence in those markets, you have your offices there, you have people who understand that language, you can go there, interact with them on a regular basis, and then get information. So it all depends upon how you want to structure your regulatory strategy around that market.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any more questions? Well, in that case, we move over to the next session, which is going to be taken by the co-chair for this track. May I invite you to please come on the dais.